first of all, I would love to know, because I want to check that you can access chat. What is the temperature where you're at? So you don't have to say where you're at, but just give us the temperature in chat and let us know if it's Celsius or Fahrenheit.
The outside temperature.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Yeah, not in your home, not in your home.
Oh, some of you are, yeah, okay. Let me see if I can.
I actually know where Brandon's at. I'm surprised it's that warm there. So, excellent, excellent. All right, good. So everyone has access to chat. So that is very important, is to try to make some connections early on, whether you are fully remote, hybrid, or somewhere else, let's put it that way. So we're going to talk mostly about hybrid remote team success, but based on your experience, you might feel that, oh, my experience does not exactly fit that. So that's not wrong, it's just different. So that's definitely a clue that you need to ask questions. Okay, so let me get on the slide here. So we're going to get you into some other tools here that we have to find out a little bit more about your experience. So there is a Menti poll that we want to find out, how productive have you felt right now? So how productive do you feel right now? Is it more productive being remote? Is it somewhat? Is it about the same as being in the office? Or have you felt less productive now? Because we've all been in this remote space now for about 2 years, whether we wanted to or not. So I'm going to give you, so that link is in the chat hopefully by now.
I also added the code for some of us who are a little bit allergic to clicking on links. Yeah, because some of us are maybe a little conservative when it comes to clicking links. Yeah.
That's okay. That's okay.
Right.
Okay, I see some votes coming in. I'm not showing it yet because I don't want to influence your vote.
Yeah, every time Mark and I ask this kind of a question, we get interesting results, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Seems to be settling now. I know there's probably some others voting, but let me go ahead and slide this into view. So this is where we're at so far. Kind of a mix. Kind of a mix.
Yeah.
What's interesting is I haven't seen anyone vote for much less productive. So that'll be interesting to explore some more.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not too different from what we have found. Okay, somebody had to vote there. All right, okay. that's okay, because remote is not for everyone. Hybrid remote is not for everyone. So I'm glad you feel safe to express that. All right, a few more voting now. Good, good. All right, I'll make sure it stabilizes. I think we've got just about everyone. So I'm going to move to the next poll. So we talked about productive. That's very analytical, but let's talk about, how do you feel? And some have already started putting some words up there. So how do you feel about remote work?
And it's, yeah, I will not add any comments yet. Notice, Mark, I managed to stop talking.
That is impressive.
But, yeah. Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, safe is an interesting word. Yeah.
Yeah.
Empowered, tired, disconnected. Some feel more focused.
I happen to really like the saves time. That's one of, and the no commute time. That's really, when I started to work from home, that's when I realized how much time I had actually spent in commuting.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one's starting to pop up a little bit more now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's a mixed collection of responses. Again, remote and hybrid remote are very different ways of working. And so one of the things we'll talk about in this session is there's a huge emphasis on communication, and it's important for you and your teammates, or if you are in a management position, your peers, to talk about how are people feeling about working remote? What can we do to help those who are feeling disconnected, that are feeling isolated? And then what can we do to not disrupt those who are feeling empowered and feel they have a better work-life balance, but are they aligned with what everyone else is doing? And so this talk will hopefully give you some ideas around that. Anything you want to add, Johanna, before we go on?
No, I will. I suspect we will reference some of these things later, and we will in our, when we post the slides, we will make sure to add in the outcomes of these polls.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let us go back to this.
Can you make that?
I can if you can start talking.
Okay. All right. So we each have a ton of experience with remote work. And I started to work with remote people back in 1987. And that's when I worked at Symbolics, where we had roll your own networking. I am sure all of you are too young to remember this, right? This is fine. However, I had to babysit the FTP transfer from the East Coast of the US to the West Coast of the US because tapes took too long, right? Tapes took too long to send between the coasts. So I have worked inside organizations with what we would call satellite or cluster teams. We're going to talk some more about that in a little bit. But that was a hybrid remote. We had most of the people I worked with were in the Boston area, and some of the people I worked with were on the West Coast in mostly 2 locations, but not always 2 locations. Mark?
And in my experience with remote, actually started in 91. So yes, we've been at this well before the pandemic. And it includes working with organizations like the US military, where you can't easily connect everything at times because of security reasons. And so screen sharing, definitely a no-no in those days. So how do you communicate? How do you coordinate different clusters of people in different locations for certain activities? Can't say more than that. But from there, I also worked in various commercial industries. So insurance, finance, VRBO, when it was HomeAway, I worked with them. And so there were other groups that were looking at how do we manage these distributed teams where we might have some in office, some are working from home, some are kind of mixing it up during the week. And how do we make sure everyone stays aligned?
And that alignment was actually very challenging for my clients. So a bunch of my clients back in the early 2000s, right, 2001, a little bit in 2000, definitely in 2002, started to offshore and outsource. And they would say, I mean, they had this question, why can't I hire people anywhere in the world? Mark and I have answered that in the book. We will talk about hours of overlap today. And it was all in search of lower salaries. We, if you remember the Agile Manifesto, that did not really get started until for software development until 2000 or 2001. I don't remember.
2001.
And yeah, and so we had managers on the one side trying to figure out how to hire lower cost people without paying attention to the overall cost of the project, of the overall cost of the work. So we have both been dealing with this for a long time, right? And that's a big deal. Okay.
So let's talk about this new reality of dispersed teams. So certainly in 2020, we all were moved into that type of working. And then in 2021, some started talking about, well, maybe we could start partially going back to work and let's go hybrid as part of that. So there were some early experiments there. And now everyone's thinking about how do we manage this hybrid space?
Well, and I think it's really important for us to recognize remote genie is out of the bottle, right? We are never going to go back, right? Back in quotes to all in-person work. We definitely advocate, Mark and I definitely advocate for some in-person work at some points. But I think the real question is, how do we optimize for forward, and especially with this hybrid remote business?
So Johanna, I'll let you take this one.
So if we think about what people want and need and what companies want and need, we know that people want work that means something. This is not a Gen X or a Gen Z or a Gen anything. This is what people want. They want to know that their work means something, and the companies want products that serve a need for the customers. People want autonomy, mastery, and purpose, which they can get with collaboration. Companies want effective teams to create those products. Not that the team, it's not that companies want teams, but they want the products, and we need teams to create them. People want and need products that customers want, which is exactly the same thing that companies need. But from the company's perspective is they want to acquire and retain customers with their products and services. So if you start thinking about outcomes, right, products, and how we create those products, it's all about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Okay.
And so you'll rarely hear Johanna and I talk about cultural differences, generational differences, because we think those generalizations are sometimes misused, to put it that way. All right. So how can we achieve these results? And how do we create these outcomes? So as you've seen here, when we first got you connected, we just asked some simple questions to pull you into chat. This is more of a talking heads webinar, so you're probably not accustomed to jumping on video. When we have Q&A later, you are certainly welcome to do that. But we engaged you right away in chat. We wanted to get pervasive communication, so it's not just us talking. We're trying to get you to talk a little bit about your experience as well. Recommend you do that with your teams, is get them to talk about where have they worked remotely, what have they experienced that's worked well and what hasn't? What have they done around project rhythm so they can set expectations and stay aligned as a team? And what is a sufficient amount of transparency? Some organizations are more comfortable with transparency than others, but the more you allow, the team is not only more aligned with each other, but they're more aligned with the entire organization if you can make details visible about where the organization is going or where the organization is stumbling. Johanna, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so you'll notice that this all goes to the purpose, right? The transparency, the communication, that really goes to purpose. The project rhythm is about autonomy and mastery. And if you keep all that self-determination theory kind of in your head as we proceed, I think that this will make a lot of sense. So we're going to talk a bunch about these are the principles, right, that we will talk about later. But especially if we think about collaboration at distance, and what we discovered through our research is that it's not very much distance that prevents us from being co-located, right? It's only about 8 meters, which is I don't know that in feet anymore, but it's not very long, right? Think of under, say, 20 seconds to walk from your desk to another desk. That's certainly those meters.
Right.
So,
right. And actually, with some other research that I looked into by Dr. Karen Lejeski, her work on virtual distance, her research corroborates that, where the actual physical distance and the time differences are really not the key problem. It's the communication and the connectivity or the affinity that people have with each other.
yeah.
And my mouse is
Okay.
wandering off. There we go.
Yeah. So go ahead,
yeah.
Mark.
Go ahead, Johanna.
Okay, so these are the principles which we're going to walk through. Let's just move on to the first one, because I don't think we need to discuss this now. So the very first, yeah, go ahead.
So we're often doing that because we're having other thoughts, some great thoughts to share. So on this one, establish acceptable hours of overlap. You might hear a lot about asynchronous work, and I definitely feel there's value in that. But when you get to critical decision points, when you get in conflict, when you get into scenarios where you really need to talk through details to make sure people are aligned, you need some hours of overlap in order for people to quickly communicate about what they understand and what they don't understand about the work, what they do and do not understand about the bigger why. So having minimal hours of overlap helps with that. When you have less than 3 to 4 hours of overlap, that becomes very difficult. When you have more than 8 hours of overlap, that can also lead to difficulty. And you might go, how would more hours of overlap be a problem? Even before the pandemic, people were feeling burned out when they were working on remote teams and they couldn't get away from their machines. So if you are in a management role, you might want to look at how long are people actually online? Are they disconnecting? Are they reconnecting with family, friends, community, and not just connected into the work that the team is doing? So it's important to visualize when people are available and when they are not available.
And that those of you who said you were tired and stressed and whatever the other words were for feeling pressure, I wonder if some of that is either insufficient hours of overlap or too many working hours.
Yeah. So Zoom fatigue is more of a symptom than the cause in that case.
Yeah. Let's go to the chart, Mark. So the nice thing about this chart is back before the pandemic, when we wrote the book, we came up with this chart because it was totally fine. This is one of my clients who is all in the same time zone, but people were in slightly different locations. And you'll notice that the top left chart, there's only 3 hours of overlap, and from 10 to noon in the morning, and then at 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So, and there are reasons for that. Polly is the product owner, Dave is the manager. They have other commitments during the day, so that's fine. So it's really not about how the time zones that people work in. It's all about how many hours of overlap. And with a little bit of rejiggering, you can see that the chart on the bottom has more hours of overlap. So the team has from 10 to 12 and from 2 to 4 in the afternoon, where 100% of the team is available. And then there's another hour where 86% of the team is available. This is enough hours of overlap. I see in the chat that Harry actually says, having 12 hours of overlap gives room to work and collaborate at other than regular times. Yes, Harry, that's actually a really lovely idea. So Mark and I tend to start work earlier in the day. Mark starts often much earlier than I do, and I tend to work a little bit later in the day than he does. But I tend to take breaks during the day. I don't walk my dog. I don't have a dog. I have a Fitbit, and I feel like I have to feed the Fitbit with my steps. Otherwise, I don't get credit for all my walking. So while I tend to work from 8:30-ish to 7-ish, sometimes later, the hours of working are distributed in there for me. And this is when we went remote, and people also were also trying to manage school for their younger children and homework for their older children and all that stuff. You might not be able to do hours of overlap. You might have to do 20 or 30-minute segments at a time. So as you think about the hours of overlap for your team, think about how many ways can I create 100% time so we have choices about how to work. Can we pair? Can we mob? Can we swarm? What makes sense for our team? Mark, did you want to add anything?
Well, and in Harry's example, he's even indicated where he may or may not be available all the time. Maybe when he walks the dog, that is, and Harry, I'm just guessing, so feel free to elaborate. It could be, this is my thinking time. This is my time away from the screen, and I'm not available then. So yes, I am on for 12 hours, but I block out certain times for lunch, to step away from the screen, not answer Slack or anything else at that time, but just have time to kind of regenerate and not be tired because of that. Yep. Okay. That's what I guessed, Harry. So, all right, great. So let's talk about this idea of transparency we mentioned before. So the idea is, how transparent can you be throughout your organization? So can you be somewhat transparent in the team and share the good and the bad? If you are maybe several teams working together on a product, can you share that kind of information rather than just discovering accidentally when something good or not so great has happened? And maybe at a broader level, what can the organization share? Because this kind of information helps a team pivot, a product pivot, an entire organization pivot if it has this level of transparency. Johanna?
And this all goes to the purpose, right? If you understand why you're doing this work, the value of this work, then you're much more likely to succeed. And now I want to talk a little bit about the no transparency and transparency in the team. Well, I am not that fond of many common tracking systems. As long as we can see what other people are doing, that's all I care about. And I also want to see who is collaborating with whom. That's me. Not everybody is like that. So your team will decide what kind of transparency they are comfortable with. Okay, I want to take this one. You are not surprised. So
I'm not.
Yeah. What we say when we work as agilists, we always say we want continuous improvement, we want experimentation. And then Mark and I see teams that say, we have to do this thing by the book, or we've always done it this way. And on the other side, I am very fond of real experiments with hypotheses and defined metrics or expected results with feedback. And that's when Mark said to me, you know, you're being a little religious about this experimentation business. So the thing in the middle is to try something and see what happens. So my questions for you, depending on whether or not you're using an agile approach, which I hope that you are, does by the book work for you? Does that book work for you? And I don't care what book that is. Where do you have freedom to experiment? Because if we think about the team's autonomy, right? We talked about that in the very beginning. Then we need freedom to experiment as a team with our process, not just with the product.
And certainly you might wonder, well, but can you really have this much flexibility? When you read up on organizations like Automatic, which develops WordPress, this is how they started from day one. And now I believe they're about 1,200 employees, and they iterate and experiment on how they work, how they develop a product, how they launch new products, how they acquire products, because I watched that with the Jetpack CRM acquisition a couple of years ago that they made. And it's not just them. Tesla does the same thing. And so it's this idea of how much freedom do we have to experiment and how strict do we need to be? Because if you are working in some areas that are very regulated, you might have to be a little more detailed in how you experiment.
So the very first experiment is often with a team board. This particular team started off with a Scrum board, just 3 columns. That's fine. They started to experiment with the board on the left, where it kind of looks a little waterfallish because they wanted to see where they were stuck. They had bottlenecks. They didn't know where they were. And then they moved to the board on the right, where they said, this is how we want to work, right? So they decided that they would keep stories to workshop and to keep a limited number of them, not try and plan for the next quarter, but to plan for the next 2 or 3 weeks. And then once they had finished stories that they workshopped, those went into the ready column, and notice that there are WIP limits, work in progress limits. Those are the numbers on the top of every column. And they only had a couple of stories in dev and unit tests at any given time, and the same thing with system test. And then they still had an acceptance column because their product owner was not available all the time. I am sure that your product owners are not available all the time either. So they came to the board on the right from an evolution. So if you are supposed to work with a standard board, explain to your managers why you need to experiment in your board. And what Mark and I have done in the past is use a shared spreadsheet as a prototype, as an experiment for a board. You don't have to start changing the board that your entire organization uses first. You can start with a prototype somewhere. And that is a very easy experiment, which increases the need for the team to communicate with each other. Right? We talked about communication first. It creates autonomy and mastery all in the sense of all in serving that purpose of the team. Mark, did you want to add anything?
No, I think we need to probably get moving on here.
Yeah.
So along with the transparency is how pervasive is the communication? How far out are things communicated, and what are the different channels? Because sometimes it can be audible. Maybe it's a live meeting like this. Maybe it's a video recording. Perhaps it's a follow-on email. So what are the different ways that you need to repeat certain messages, not all messages? Because I think at this point, we've all been bombarded with various types of electronic messaging, no matter what platform you use. So it's not about turning up the noise, it's about filtering the noise from those messages and making sure the right messages, like we are going to pivot our product line or our product. You want to make sure everyone gets that kind of message and has an idea of when it's going to happen and what they need to do. So there is a possibility of saying too little and just sending it out an email or putting it out in an all hands kind of meeting, assuming that everyone will listen to a recording, versus over communicating where people get overloaded with messages and overwhelmed by that. So Hannah, anything to add?
No, let's just go on to the picture because I think that's going to explain it next. Best, I should say. So notice that all the synchronous communication is more rich and natural, right? I find this so funny. There are two competing theories of communication. There's rich communication, which is where you can see the humanness of people. And then there's the naturalness. I should say the richness is in all of the ways that we see and hear each other. And the naturalness is the fact that we are not avatars. So anything that's asynchronous, in blue on the bottom left, that's useful, right? We all need asynchronous communication. Well, I think we all need asynchronous communication, but we get a lot more of the music and the possibility when we can see each other. That's why video is so important. Now, Mark, do you want to talk about that dedicated chat back channel?
Sure. So with the technologies we have now, it's always good to have a backup system. And in most cases, that's chat. So if we were a team, I probably would not be using the Zoom chat. I would be using a separate chat tool, because if Zoom went down, and yes, it can, I've been there, you want to be able to coordinate with team members quickly to get on some other kind of synchronous communication channel. So I've seen teams that have had a problem with Zoom, and in seconds were able to use chat to fire up either a Slack meeting or a Google Meet and just continue the meeting right off the bat. In a hybrid situation, that's a little trickier because people have to shuffle around in meeting rooms, and trying to find a new meeting room in under 10 seconds is near impossible. But a hybrid remote team that focuses mostly on staying in the virtual can do that quickly by having that dedicated chat channel that the team is always in and coordinating in. All right, let's move on. So we see with this these kind of hybrid teams that we're seeing, we see these two basic types that we mentioned earlier. The cluster team where you have clusters of people in each location, and the satellite team where the majority are in a location, but you have people either working away or just working from home. And the affinity is what we tend to pay attention to when we look at these kind of teams, and when Johanna and I coach these kind of teams. So if we're seeing stronger affinity at the locations, we look at how can we maybe loosen that a little bit and strengthen the affinity of the whole team. So that dedicated team chat channel is one of it. On teams that I've been in, that chat is on my phone. So no matter what, my team can reach me. And you might say, yeah, but I don't want that. Well, it depends on, again, that affinity, if you're working closely together and there's hours of overlap. So if I were, so I'm going to use Harry as an example. So if I were Harry walking my dog and saying, okay, this is my thinking time, you can sign off a chat for that. There's various ways to signal to your team you're not available. But when you're back on, if you are working away, maybe you're working in a coffee shop, or you're working somewhere else, a new location, or you're working from home, you still have that way to stay connected. Bless you. And it's also important to keep communication lines like that open, so we know when somebody's struggling with a sneeze. So thank you for that example. Johanna?
No, I think that the real issue is we tend to think that other people's teams look like ours, and we were nebula teams when we were all dispersed, and now we are not nebulas, and the various kinds of hybrids are actually much more difficult to get that communication going in, because we don't know when people are available unless we've done hours of overlap, and we don't know where they are and how to create that really good information communication.
And we've certainly seen this as some people have started going back into an office space, but some are not comfortable, and maybe the organization is allowing some flexibility for people to work at home. And what happens is, especially in these satellite situations, the people who are back in the office are very excited to see each other, and they're high-fiving, and they're just talking and just glad to see people again. And these folks, our satellites, are kind of left out to float in space. And I've seen this. Johanna's seen this. I've talked to many other coaches that work with remote teams, and they're struggling with this as well. So the key is, when you are having those synchronous events, how do you keep those people engaged? How do you make sure they're not lost out in space?
Yeah, let's zoom along here.
Yep.
So one of the things that we noticed, especially with our experience with remote teams for all these years, is that it's so important to assume good intent, that we too often, well, I do this. I will certainly admit to this. I'm in a mood, right? Something has happened. An email comes over the transom, and it feels like it's blaming to me. And instead, if I take just a second and remind myself of the Satir congruence model, it's not just about myself and my reactions, it's also about the other in the context. So if we can assume good intent from any communication we have with other people, we are much more than halfway there.
Yeah, because otherwise we get into these situations you see on the spectrum here, where we're just placating others, or we're just blaming others because we don't.
Working on that.
Okay.
Is that your phone?
No, it is not. It's somebody else.
Something went wrong. Oh, please try again.
Oh, Sorry, I had it
So,
on mute. Why is
so
it doing this?
that was a perfect example there of the context. So it's understanding, it's not you taking on the blame or blaming others, but it's understanding the context. So in this situation, we just realized that Siri was trying to jump in on the conversation on Johanna's side, and that's okay. It's something that we deal with all the time. So as another example, and I think I recognize some familiar faces, but you might have seen me post a picture of the red light in my office. So that light is inside and outside the door. So my family understands the context that I am operating in. It indicates I am on camera. And our agreement is if you come in, you will be introduced to whoever is in the meeting with me. So this is what I call my bring your kids to work at any time. So the first couple of times this happened, my kids were like, oh no. And now they know not to interrupt me when they come in. So I don't get mad when they come in. They don't get upset because they understand the context. So that's how you can use this with your teams and understanding what are they dealing with their background and their situation versus your situation.
All right, this is, I am huge on creating a project with them. Now, I am not, I don't care what kind of an agile approach people use. I don't care if you use an iteration-based approach where you have a strict time box and everything, all the work stops at the end of the time box. I don't care if you plan on demand, if you only use flow. I find that the more we think about the flow of delivery inside the project, the more we will benefit from our work. So I really like a cadence of planning and demos and more. One of my clients uses a totally plan on demand approaches to their planning. And I believe that they do, they always workshop a couple of stories on Mondays and Thursdays. They always have a demo on Wednesdays. They do a retrospective on Fridays. And that does not look like any kind of agile approach that's out of a box, right? I would never do retrospectives on Fridays, but they like it. So that's totally fine. They have rhythms for every single piece of their work. And why can they do this? Because they deliver something into the code base at least as often as a couple of times a day. So their stories are small. They can continue to plan on demand. They can always have a demo available for anybody who wants it, but their public demos are Wednesdays. This works for them, right? They have many, many project rhythms. And if you can think about when do you want which kinds of rhythms in your project, you are much more likely to succeed.
And as a matter of fact, right now, one of my clients, I'm working with a communications team, not a software team. And they are looking at how do we inform and educate people about upcoming concepts around data science and AI and agile and lean and all these different forces that are reshaping the organization so that some of the people who are not technical feel they are better informed and know how to leverage some of these changes before the changes happen. So that's what I'm working with now. And they have different rhythms on when they output certain kinds of messaging. They have certain rhythms as to when they plan that and certain rhythms as to when we reflect on that and see how are things landing with people, what kind of analytics, what kind of feedback are we getting from that. So similar kind of thing, it's different project rhythms, but they have a rhythm for everything. Okay, so let's talk about creating a culture of resilience. So we never realized how important this was going to be when the book came out 2.5 years ago. And in a nutshell, what we recommend is not just to have conversations about work. It's conversations about the work, about a little bit about personal context, because that personal context can impact the work. So Johanna, as we collaborate on the book, has met my entire family. She knows some of the family rhythms. She knows when I'm available and when I'm not available because of that. I haven't told her my entire family history. She doesn't need to know all that. She may not want to know all that, but she understands the rhythms of how what happens behind me impacts my work and when I'm available to collaborate or not. A third element is also what's important in the person's growth. And this is not just, oh, someday I want to drop being an agile coach and I want to be an actor. No, it's not that. It's more what do I want to do in the work that will help me grow? What will help my family situation, my other contexts? So how can I grow to positively impact my other two contexts? Because part of that's going to impact all of you as a team. So sharing that where I want to grow, where you can, helps people understand where they might be able to see opportunities for you. So not just when you're not available and when you are, but, oh, you know what? I want to work with Harry on this next workshop because I know Harry has an interest in certain things that I'm interested in, and we should pair up on that. So Harry, hope you don't mind me using you as an example there, since you've been chatting with us here today. But that's the kind of thing that's important, and not again. And so that's important to share just enough context so that people can collaborate in a deeper way.
And there's also the piece about I was expecting my husband's computer yesterday, right? His new computer. I had to be available for the FedEx guy so I could sign for it. I mean, it's even little things like that. Okay. Yep. So a lot of us, at least before the pandemic, thought that when we were all dispersed, we should work alone. And I think that now we finally understand we can collaborate together. I guess that's an oxymoron, but we really need to think about those hours of overlap as when we can collaborate, and our tools really need to support that. Now, Mark and I, Pierre wrote that entire book. I guess I should say we worked alone on creating some of the images, and then we reviewed them together, right? So sometimes we did some solo work. Well, we had this real product that we totally paired on the entire time. And we found that not only fulfilling, but we had a better product as a result. And that's something that we see in agile teams all the time. The more you collaborate as you produce the work product, the work product tends to be better. So instead of defaulting to solo work, how can you default to pairing another real-time collaboration?
And as some practical examples, going back to the word cloud, some of you mentioned isolated. Some of you mentioned safe. So in order to address those two feelings, experimenting a little bit with this is useful. So for instance, I mentioned earlier, I'm working on a communications team. It's mostly writers and artists. I'm not a graphic artist, so I have a hard time collaborating with them because I just slow them down. but with the writers, I certainly can. And we've invited, and we've invited the graphic artists because they have to do companion imagery. And so we've been doing some short pairing and mobbing sessions as we talk about what new information pieces, what's important, who's the key audience for this, and how do we craft this so it's digestible, because they're getting hundreds of messages throughout their workday because they're a fully remote organization. And we need to wrap up.
So
Yes.
when we think about collaboration, think about how your organization thinks about resource efficiency versus flow efficiency. Most organizations think about how what each person does, that's the resource efficiency picture on the top. But every time you have a handoff, you have a potential delay between people. Agile teams especially work best in flow efficiency, where the team takes on work. And as long as you think about how can you start to work in flow efficiency, where you focus on the outcomes, not the outputs between people, you are much more likely to be effective. So I think we can explain, do a value stream map. We both have several blog posts and articles about this, and we will have the slides later so you can think about how you can create a value stream map.
Yeah, and I just want to add, this is a very simple value stream map that can help you look for those delays so that you can build faster feedback loops.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll skip this one because we talk about it in the blog post.
So what we say is, I'm not sure when we will all be back in the office. I'm not sure that that's a viability any longer at all. And I think we need to use asynchronous work better, right? How do we prepare for our real-time collaboration? And in my opinion, the organizations that fund personal setups, right? Mark and I have at least a couple of monitors. I think Mark has another one. I don't know. He has many monitors and many pieces of interesting equipment. The organizations that fund really good personal setups will win. And the organizations that want people back in the office, I'm not sure that that's really going to really work, at least for the next few years. Mark, did you have any other predictions?
I think we're still going to be going up and down on this for a while. I've seen organizations where even within the organization, there's differences where maybe the IT group decides to go fully remote, but the rest of the organization, because of the type of work, can't go remote. So they're going hybrid for a while. so it's going to be in transition for a good long time. All right, I want to make sure we have time for questions though.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the 8 principles that we've talked about, and yeah, let's just open it up for any questions.
Yes.
I
if you have questions,
go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you have questions, please turn on your camera and unmute yourself. And Mark, I interrupted you.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, feel free to drop comments in chat as well. Harry made a really interesting comment about, for non-English people, the difference between resilience and resistance can be unclear. Yes. Yeah. And this is always a challenge. So I don't know, Johanna, I think you have a better way of explaining this one. I don't know if you want to take this.
Sure. So I see resilience as the ability to see that there is a need for another approach, and the emotional capability to try something new, right? When we are, and resistance is often resistance to being changed, not initiating the change yourself. So I I'm kind of a pain in the ass, sorry, to work with at times, because I would say to Mark as we were writing this book, let's try this. And sometimes Mark would say, really? That's not exactly resistance, but that was a signal to me that I might be pushing too many changes on him. And when I did that to him, it's because he also had really good ideas, right? I'm not the only one with good ideas, right? So when Mark did that to me, and I would have this initial reaction of, oh, that's where I need my emotions to support me in trying something new. So that's resilience, where you have the emotional capacity to be able to try something new. Resistance is often, we're afraid of losing something, especially our competence. And the more we think about how we retain our competence in the face of doing something new, that's where we land. I have not seen Henrik's video on efficiency, but I do have a 5-part series on my blog about flow efficiency, which I will find and put in the chat.
That's the same, yeah.
Okay.
The resource utilization trap video.
Yep. So Henrik tends to do videos. I tend to write. And that's why we are both different people.